Hey guys, how's it going? This is a full body stretch that will take about 20 minutes of your day, and hopefully it'll just help relieve some of the stress that your body's been through this week. We're going to start with a hamstring stretch, so lay on the floor and raise your leg to about 90 degrees. Your other leg is going to lay flat on the ground, and you're going to hold your leg right above your knee. What makes this stretch so effective is using the quad muscle to stretch that hamstring even further, so make sure it's nice and tense. We've been holding the stretch for about 30 seconds now, but for the last 3, I'd just like you to pull your leg a little bit closer to you, so take a deep breath, pull that leg closer for 3, 2, 1, and release. Grab the other leg, do the exact same thing, grab right below the knee, extend that leg straight out in front of you at about 90 degrees. In order to get that proper hamstring stretch, make sure both hips are flat on the floor. So this stretch not only benefits your hamstring, but if you flex your foot, it will also help stretch out that calf as well. We're coming up on the end of that 30 seconds, so get ready to pull that leg a little bit closer to you. Take a deep breath and pull it in for the last 3, 2, 1, and release. Hamstrings are one of the largest muscle groups in our body, so it's super important to get these stretched out. We're going to do a similar stretch to what we just did, except we'll be bending and straightening our knee in order to get the best stretch of that hamstring. This is an active stretch, which means you need to use your quad muscle to stretch that hamstring out as much as you can as the foot comes up to the top. And we'll do this about 10 times or so. Same as in the last stretch, make sure you're flexing your foot, that way you get a little bit of a stretch in your calves as well as in your hamstrings. On that 10th one, just hold it up there for another 10 seconds or so. Get that maximum stretch out of the hamstring before we release it and switch to the other leg. Same thing as before, grab right above your knee, bend and straighten your leg, pausing at the top for about 2 seconds or so to get that maximum stretch. Really use your quad here to stretch that hamstring out. Bring your focus to your hips while you're doing this stretch just to make sure they're both sitting on the ground. And we're almost at the end of our 10 repetitions here, which means we'll just hold at the top to finish off this next leg. Great. Moving on to our next stretch. We're not entirely done with hamstrings, but we're going to go ahead and stretch out our lower back for a second. So in this stretch, we've got one leg tucked into our knee, the other leg extended out straight. You're going to reach your hands towards your feet. If you can't touch your feet, grab your ankle. If you can't grab your ankle, grab your knee. Doesn't matter how far you go as long as you're feeling a stretch in your lower back. You're going to drop your forehead to your knee and round your back in this stretch. It's also beneficial in this stretch to flex your foot and point your toes straight towards the sky. Moving into our next stretch on this leg, it's going to look very similar, but it's going to stretch things a little differently. Start by placing your hands on either side of your leg, keeping your head up and keeping your back as flat as possible. Once you're starting to feel a bit more comfortable in this position, just inch your hands forward ever so slightly. You really want to keep a flat back during this stretch because it helps to stretch that hamstring out a little bit more intensely. A lot of people struggle with this, so a good way to think about it is less of a flat back and more of an arched back. You want to be pushing your hips backwards so that you're stretching your hamstring as much as you can. And once again, flex that foot to get a little bit of a stretch of the calf as well. Alright, let's switch it up, change to the other leg. And we're going to start with that low back stretch again. So once again, you're reaching towards your foot, which should be flexed and pointed to the sky, rounding your back and letting your head fall towards your knee. This is going to stretch out your entire back and a little bit of your hamstring as well. And once we've sat in this for about 30 seconds or so, we will come up and place our hands on either side of our leg, keeping our back nice and flat and our head up. you'll feel a really intense stretch in your hamstring. And if the stretch doesn't feel that intense, try arching your back and see if that intensifies the stretch a little bit. Flex the foot and make sure both hips are flat on the ground. It's pretty easy to let your back round during this stretch, so make sure in these last few seconds that your back is super flat, you're pressing your hips backwards, and really stretching that hamstring. Moving on to the largest muscle in our body, which is your gluteus maximus. Those are your butt muscles. We're going to cross one leg over the other, making sure to place the ankle on top of the knee instead of your foot. Flex the foot and really press your knee down towards the floor. We're about halfway through this stretch, so we're just going to add an ankle rotation. You'll start to feel subtle differences in this stretch in your hip and your glute. Also in this stretch, the flatter that your back is, the more of a stretch you'll get in that glute. I'm utilizing my arms to prop myself up, but also to keep my back nice and flat. Next, we're going to extend that leg that's on the ground and bring this leg that's crossed over nice and tight to your body. You want this leg to be twisting across yourself, so give it a nice big hug and think about bringing that knee to your opposite shoulder. In order to get more of a twist from that leg, I like to bend my leg like this, pressing my thigh against my ankle in order to get that leg as far over as possible. Now let's release that and switch to the other side. So now I'm crossing my left leg over my right, placing my ankle right on that knee, and flexing the foot to make sure I'm getting a full stretch. Now we're about halfway through, so I'll go into some ankle rotations to get those really subtle differences in the stretch. It also just feels nice. And now we'll do the same as we did before. Straighten that leg that's on the ground, bring the leg across your body, give it a nice big hug, bringing that knee to your opposite shoulder. Doing the same as I did on the other side, I'm just going to bend my leg, press my thigh against my ankle to twist that leg across my body just that little bit more. Bring your focus to your hips really quickly, just making sure that both of them are still on the ground, even in this twisted pretzel position. Nice. Moving on to our next stretch, we're going to lay all the way back, extend our arms out to the side. You can either put your palms down or palms up, it doesn't matter. Raise your leg up to 90 degrees and then slowly lower it down. It's important to lower it down slowly. You don't want to shock any of your muscles here. From here, you want to make sure that your base leg is extended all the way down and the leg that's extended across you is straight as you possibly can have it. That leg that's extended across your body, try and bring the toe up towards your hand. That'll help enhance this stretch just a little bit. Your head is going to be facing the sky. You're going to get a nice twist of the spine here. To get out of this stretch, just bend your leg and twist back to center. I'm going to go for the next leg, so raise that leg up at a 90-degree angle and let it fall slowly to the side. You want to make sure during this stretch that you're keeping both shoulders on the ground and just twisting your spine to get that foot over into that position. Keeping your leg as straight as possible and trying to get those toes up as close to your hand as you can. I'll remind you again to keep on breathing during this stretch especially. Bend the leg, twist back to center, and flip around. We're going to be doing a couple stretches on our belly now, starting with a cobra stretch. So So place your hands about shoulder width apart in front of you. Extend your legs straight behind you and extend your arms straight up. From there, you're going to tilt your head upwards to get a full stretch of that abdominal area, the front of your torso. I'm going to throw in a little bit of a twist back and forth because it feels really nice and just helps loosen up the spine. Make sure that when you're doing this stretch that you keep your shoulders depressed. You don't want them to be up by your earlobes, you want them to be down and relaxed. Also, engaging the glutes will help enhance that stretch a little bit. Let's rock back into child's pose. Stretch out that lower back that was just crunched during Cobra. In this one, we are extending our hands forward as far as they go, placing our forehead on the ground, and dropping our hips back as far as they can go. Use your fingertips to inch your hands forward. Now, before we get up from this position, let's do another variation of the child's pose. Start in this stretch the way you just had it, and then take one of your hands and place it right on top of the other hand. This is going to give you a bit of a lateral bend, which will help stretch muscles in your back and your obliques, which are part of your torso. And really take a few deep breaths into this stretch before we switch to the other side. Now we'll return that hand to center and bring the other hand across to stretch the other side. Focusing on extending those hands forward and pushing your hips backwards to really stretch that back out. Taking nice deep breaths before we switch to our next stretch. Coming up on another yoga pose now, we're going to do some downward dog. So press your palms and your heels into the ground, keeping your arms extended straight and your legs extended straight, and your hips up in the air. The best way I can explain getting into this pose and getting it right is pretending you've got a rope tied around your hips and someone is pulling that rope upwards. So your hips are always going up, but your heels are always pressing down. Now let's bend one leg and put the emphasis on the other calf muscle for a second. After a few breaths, let's change legs. Make sure to keep your head down during this and in between your arms. And now that the blood has rushed all the way to your head, maybe we get out of this one. So step forward, bounce 3 or 4 times on your toes just like this to release any more tension in your calves, before rolling all the way up and stepping forward into a stretch that's a favorite of mine. It's a kneeling hip flexor stretch. So in this kneeling position, the knee that's up at the front should be bent at about 90 degrees. And if it's not, try moving your foot forward or backwards an inch or two to get that 90 degree. So in this case, my left leg is on the ground, so I'm going to take my left arm and bring it up over my head and reaching behind me as if I was picking an apple behind my head. This is really going to intensify the stretch along that left hip flexor. To really get the full benefit of this stretch, you should be engaging your glutes and trying to press your hips forward and down to really stretch that hip flexor. The magic number for most of these stretches is going to be 30 seconds. It's the amount of time that it takes for your brain to tell your muscle to relax. So I'll hold most of these stretches for about 30 seconds, but this one being my favorite, I might relax into it for a bit longer. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to the other leg. Set it up the exact same way, making sure that that knee in the front is at about 90 degrees. We've only got a few more stretches left, so just check in. You still with me? Great. Okay, bringing our focus back to this hip flexor stretch. Make sure your glutes are engaged and your hips are pressing forwards and down. Now we're going to intensify that stretch by taking our right arm this time and reaching it behind us as if we were picking that apple. Another way to intensify this stretch, those toes that are behind you, press them firmly into the ground. That's really going to fire up that hip flexor and make for a more intense stretch. Alright, enough of this one, and let's get to some standing stretches. We're going to start with a standing quad stretch. Bring your foot up to your bum on the same side of your body. We don't need your foot crossing over to your opposite bum cheek. Pull your knee back so that it's at least in line with your other knee. If you can get it back even further, that is a bonus. Make sure that your body is upright. You don't want to be leaning forward on this stretch. Leaning forward is only going to shorten that muscle, and right now we're trying to make it as long as possible. Alright, let's release that foot and switch to our other leg. Making sure to use our ankle for balance. Once you've grabbed that leg, brought it up to your bum, kept your knee back and your posture upright, you can intensify this stretch a little bit by squeezing your glute muscles. That's going to lengthen your quad muscle just that little bit more, and you'll feel it right away. Once we've held this for about 30 seconds or so, we can release and move on to our upper body stretches, starting with a shoulder stretch. So you're going to reach your arm all the way across your body, extending your elbow straight. Keep your shoulder down during this stretch, making sure that it's far away from your ears. Now we're going to add a little bit of a circular motion. Pretend you're drawing a circle about the size of a basketball. Once you do 4 or 5 rotations in one direction, make sure you switch and go the other direction, though I do not show that in this video. Shake some blood back into your arms and switch sides. Once again, we're keeping that elbow super duper straight, keeping the shoulder away from our ear, keeping your posture upright, and making sure that shoulder is relaxed. Now we can start drawing those circles again, about the size of a basketball. Moving the shoulder through that entire range of motion, getting it stretched out in every direction. Now let's release from this stretch, get some blood back in our fingertips before we raise our arm up over our head behind us, scratching right in the middle of our back, at the base of your neck. Bring your other arm up to pull that arm across, creating the greatest stretch that we can on our tricep. And while you're here, give yourself a pat on the back, because stretching is super important. And all the stretches that we've done today are going to help your body function a little bit better. And now, after about 30 seconds, we can release this stretch, get some blood back in our fingertips before we go and do the other side. So reach up and over, scratching the middle of your back right below your neck, and pulling that elbow over. Make sure you take a few breaths during this stretch. You're doing great, or at least I'm going to assume you're doing great. Go ahead and release that, shake some blood back into your fingertips for our last stretch of the day. You're going to interlock your fingers behind your back, just like this, and straighten your elbows as much as possible. This stretch is meant to target your biceps, which is a particularly difficult muscle to stretch. So the best way to do that is to extend your elbows as straight as possible. Lift your hands away from your bum as far as you can. Doing this is going to help stretch your shoulders, a bit of your chest, and hopefully enhance that bicep stretch as well. Now we've stretched everything in our lower body and our upper body, and now it's time to make sure it's all mobile. Starting with our ankles, let's do 5 big rotations in one direction, getting a full range of motion before we switch to 5 full rotations in the other direction. Making sure when you're doing this that you're getting a nice stretch every time it rotates outwards. Try and let your ankle do most of the movement here, keeping the knee and the hip as still as possible. Moving up the body to the knees, I'm just placing my hands gently there to support them and guide them through this clockwise rotation. And now let's go through and do our counterclockwise rotations as well. Now we'll move up to our shoulders, so just place your fingertips lightly on that shoulder joint and do 3 rotations backwards and 3 rotations forwards with this little chicken wing that you've created. And of course, we have to do the other side. Really try and get a full range of motion of that shoulder joint when you're doing these chicken wings. And let's finish off this recovery day with some neck movements, starting by looking down. Now let's look up, tilt your head to one side and to the other. Roll your head in a clockwise direction. Let's do 2 nice big circles. And of course, go in the opposite direction, counterclockwise twice. Now shake everything out. Hopefully it all feels a little bit better. Thanks for joining me on this 20-minute recovery session. See you later.